The man standing across from me looked like a stranger. Mark, the man I had shared a bed with for 12 years, was currently staring at a medical envelope as if it were a ticking bomb. His face, usually twisted into a sneer of superiority, had gone as pale as the kitchen tiles. The silence in the room was so thick it felt like it was crushing my lungs. "It's a mistake," he whispered, but his voice lacked the usual thunder. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. "The DNA doesn't lie, Mark," I said, my voice steadier than I ever thought possible. "You've spent a decade telling me I was the one holding us back. You told me I was biologically defective. You called me useless every time my period arrived and we weren't pregnant. Just an hour ago, I was the woman who lived in the shadows of his insults. I was the woman who apologized for existing. But now, holding those results, the power in the room had shifted so violently that I could almost hear the air crackling. For years, I believed his lies. I believed I was the reason our home was quiet and empty. But the paper in my hand revealed a truth so dark, so calculated, that it changed everything. Mark wasn't just a husband who was disappointed. He was a man with a second life, a second family, and a secret son who was already 10 years old. And he had used my infertility as a weapon to keep me under his thumb while he lived a double life. Right now, the tension in our house is unbearable. It's like living inside a pressure cooker. We are currently sitting in our pristine, expensive living room, the one Mark reminds me I didn't earn because I'm just a housewife. He is pretending to watch the news, but I can see his hands shaking. The conflict started when I decided to do one of those popular ancestry kits. I thought it would be a fun hobby, maybe find some distant cousins. Instead, I found a close match, a 99% match for a father-son relationship. The boy's name is Toby. He lives 3 towns over, and his father's profile? It was a direct link to Mark's brother, who had uploaded his DNA years ago. The math was simple, but the betrayal was complex. For the last 5 years, Mark has been escalating his verbal abuse. He calls me useless at least once a day. If I burn the toast, I'm useless. If I forget to pick up his dry cleaning, I'm useless. But the most painful useless was always directed at my body. We tried for a baby for 7 years. We went to doctors, or so I thought. Mark always handled the paperwork. He made me feel like half a woman. I hint at the injustice every time I look at him now. I see the way he sneaks out for late meetings on Tuesdays. I never questioned him before because he had me convinced that I was lucky he stayed with a broken woman like me. But now I know. Those meetings aren't meetings. They're soccer practices. They're birthday parties. They're a whole life that I paid for with my emotional sanity. He isn't just a cheater. He's a thief who stole my bearing years by lying about my health to cover his own tracks. The trap is set, and for the first time in 12 years, I'm the one holding the key. 12 years ago, our life smelled like fresh rain and hope. We met in college. Mark was charming, the kind of guy who walked into a room and made everyone else feel like background characters. I was a romantic. I believed in the happily ever after. Our wedding was on a cliffside, the salt spray from the ocean misting my veil. I remember the way he looked at me, like I was the only prize he ever wanted to win. We moved into a small starter home that always smelled like cinnamon because I was constantly baking. I wanted to create a sanctuary for us. Mark was ambitious. He worked in high-end real estate, and I supported him every step of the way. I worked 2 jobs to help him get his license and start his firm. I believed we were a team. "One day, Clara," he'd say, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear, "this house will be filled with the sound of our kids running around. I want a boy first, someone to carry the name." That was our dream, or so I thought. After 2 years of marriage, we started trying. Every month that passed without a positive test felt like a small mourning. I remember the first time I cried in the bathroom, staring at a single pink line. Mark held me. He told me it was okay. He was so patient back then. But as the years crept by, the patience turned into a cold, hard shell. The cinnamon smell in the house was replaced by the sterile scent of hospital corridors. We started seeing specialists. Mark insisted on a specific clinic, a place his friend recommended. I was so vulnerable, so desperate to be a mother that I let him lead. I remember sitting in those cold leather chairs, holding his hand, waiting for news. When the results came back, Mark was the one who spoke to the doctor privately while I was in the recovery room after a procedure. He came back with red eyes. "It's not good news, Clara," he whispered. "The doctor says your eggs, they aren't viable. He says it's a 1 in a million condition. There's no fix." My world ended that day. I felt like a failure. I felt like I had robbed Mark of the one thing he wanted. I spent the next 3 years trying to make up for it. I became the perfect wife. I kept the house spotless. I dressed exactly how he liked. I gave up my career because he said stress would make my condition worse. I became a ghost in my own life, all because I felt I owed him for staying with a useless woman. I didn't realize that while I was grieving a child that never existed, he was already tucking a little boy into bed in a house 30 miles away. The shift wasn't overnight. It was like a slow leak in a dam. It started with small comments about my leisurely life. "Must be nice," Mark would say, coming home and tossing his briefcase on the floor. "Must be nice to sit around all day doing nothing while I'm out there breaking my back for a family that isn't even complete." That was the first time he used the word complete as a weapon. Then came the Tuesdays. Mark started having late-night networking events every Tuesday. He'd come home smelling not of alcohol or perfume, but of something strange, like cheap pizza and grass. When I asked him about it, he snapped. "I'm trying to build a legacy, Clara. Since you can't give me one, I have to work twice as hard to make sure our name means something. Don't question me. You're lucky I'm even here." The emotional imbalance became a chasm. He started comparing me to other women, the wives of his colleagues who had 2 or 3 children. He'd point them out at parties. "Look at Sarah," he'd whisper loudly enough for me to hear. 3 kids and she still runs a business, and you can't even get the grocery list right. You're useless, Clara, truly." I began to notice he was protective of his phone, but not in the way a typical cheater is. He wasn't hiding texts from a mistress. He was hiding photos. Once I saw a glimpse of a screen, a photo of a young boy in a baseball uniform. "Who's that?" I asked. He slammed the phone face down. "A client's kid. I'm mentoring him. Not that you'd understand what it's like to care for a child." He started losing money, small amounts at first, then thousands. He claimed the market was down, but I saw the withdrawals from our joint savings. When I confronted him, he turned it back on me. "I'm investing in our future. Since we won't have kids to take care of us in our old age, I have to be aggressive. If you had a brain for business, you'd know that, but you don't. You just have your baking and your uselessness." I began to feel a deep sense of neglect. He stopped looking at me. He stopped touching me. I was just a piece of furniture that cleaned the other furniture. But the biggest red flag was the pediatrician bill I found in the trash. It wasn't for my clinic. It was for a pediatrics. "Mark, why are we paying for a pediatrician?" I asked that night. He didn't even blink. I told you I'm helping a client. He's going through a divorce and I'm covering some costs as a favor. It's called networking, Clara, something a useless housewife wouldn't understand. He was so arrogant, so sure that I was too broken to ever look closer. He had spent years breaking my spirit so that I wouldn't have the strength to doubt him. The conflict grew stronger when Mark decided he wanted to downsize. He told me that since I wasn't a mother, I didn't need a house this big to clean. "We're moving to a condo," he announced one morning. "I'm selling this place. I need the liquid capital for a new venture." "But this is our home," I protested. "I love this garden." "You love sitting in the dirt," he sneered. "I'm the one paying the mortgage. You contribute nothing. You are a drain on my resources, Clara. You're lucky I don't just put you in a studio apartment and call it a day." His actions became clear. He was trying to strip away the last bits of my comfort to fund his other life. Toby, I would later find out, was starting a private school that year. The downsize was really a tuition payment. Then came the family reunion incident. Mark's parents were celebrating their 50th anniversary. Mark told me I wasn't invited. "It's a small affair," he lied. "Only the core family. My parents find it awkward to be around you, Clara. Seeing you reminds them of the grandchildren they'll never have. It's better if you stay here and, I don't know, clean the baseboards." I spent that weekend alone, sobbing. But then I saw a post on Facebook from Mark's cousin. It was a photo of the whole family, and there was Mark standing with a woman I didn't recognize and a young boy who looked exactly like Mark's high school photos. They all were smiling. They all looked like a core family. When he came home, I showed him the photo. My hands were shaking. "Who are they, Mark?" He didn't even try to hide it. He laughed. "That's my real life, Clara. That's Elena and Toby, my family. Since you couldn't do your one job as a woman, I found someone who could. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd get hysterical. You should be happy for me. At least the Thorne name lives on." The stakes increased significantly. He wasn't even hiding the betrayal anymore. He started bringing Elena's laundry home for me to wash, claiming his son deserved clean clothes and his real wife was too busy with her career. "Think of it as your rent," he said, throwing a bag of dirty soccer uniforms at my feet. "You're useless at everything else. At least you can do the laundry." I was at my breaking point. I was ready to leave, to just disappear. But then I remembered the doctor. I remembered the 1 in a million condition. If Mark had a son who was 10 and we had been trying for 12, something didn't add up. Why would he stay with me if I was the useless one? Why go through the effort of lying for a decade? I realized he didn't want a divorce. He wanted a maid he didn't have to pay and a broken woman he could use to feel powerful. He was using me as a scapegoat to look like a saint who stayed with his infertile wife while secretly being a father. I needed proof. I needed the truth about my own body. I didn't go back to the Friends clinic. I went to a top-tier fertility specialist in the city. I used the small inheritance my grandmother had left me, money Mark didn't know I had. The doctor, a calm and strategic woman named Dr. Eris, sat me down after 2 weeks of tests. "Clara," she said, looking at her tablet, "I've reviewed the files you brought from your previous clinic, the ones your husband provided." And I held my breath. "These files are forged," she said bluntly, "and not very well. The medical terminology is used incorrectly, and the letterhead is from a clinic that closed 5 years before these dates." I felt the room spin. "So my eggs?" "You are perfectly healthy, Clara," Dr. Eris said, her voice gentle. "There is absolutely no biological reason why you couldn't have conceived a decade ago. Based on these files, it appears your husband was the one with the low motility. He didn't want to admit he was the problem, so he created a narrative where you were the failure. But wait, If he was the problem, how did he have Toby? "Dr. Eris," I whispered, "is it possible for him to have a child with someone else?" With his counts, highly unlikely without significant medical intervention. That was the first piece of the puzzle. The second piece came from the DNA kit I mentioned in the hook. I didn't just find Toby. I found Alina's mother, Toby's mother, on social media. I reached out to her under a fake name, pretending to be an old college friend of Mark's. She was surprisingly chatty. We met for coffee. She thought I was just some random woman from his past. "Oh, Mark is great," she said, sipping her latte. "He's such a dedicated uncle to Toby." "Uncle?" I froze. "Yeah," she laughed. "Toby is actually his best friend's son. His friend passed away 10 years ago, and Mark stepped up. He pays for everything. He's been like a father to him. He even told me he wished Toby was his, but his wife, that's you, I guess, was too mentally unstable to handle a child, so he couldn't adopt him officially." The secret was out. Mark wasn't just a cheater, he was a fraud. Toby wasn't his biological son. He was a charity project he used to play act at being a father while simultaneously using the boy's existence to humiliate me and lying to me about my mental state to keep Elena from ever contacting me. He was paying for Toby's life with our money. He was lying to me about my body to keep me subservient. He was a man built entirely out of lies. I had 48 hours. Mark was hosting a victory dinner at our house for his firm's biggest clients and his parents. He wanted to announce the sale of our house and his new direction. He told me I had to serve the food and stay in the kitchen. "Don't embarrass me, Clara," he said, adjusting his $500 tie. "Just bring the plates out and keep your mouth shut. You're the help tonight." I felt a cold, sharp focus. I called my lawyer, Sarah, a woman who specialized in high-asset divorces and fraud. "I have the DNA results, I have the forged medical records, and I have a statement from the pediatric clinic," I told her. "We have enough for a criminal fraud case, Clara," she said, "not just a divorce. She stole your medical autonomy. She stole your right to choose your life." The internal struggle was there, but it was dying. A small part of me remembered the man on the cliffside, but that man was a ghost. The man in my kitchen was a monster. 36 hours to go. I organized all the evidence into folders. I made copies. I put one set in a safe deposit box. 24 hours to go. I went to the grocery store. I bought the finest ingredients for his victory dinner. I wanted the food to be perfect. I wanted him to be as happy as possible right before the floor fell out. 12 hours to go. I saw Mark on the phone, laughing. He was talking to Alina. "Yeah, baby, the house sells next week. Then we can finally get that place in the hills. The useless one will be gone soon. I've already got the papers ready for her to sign. She's too dumb to read the fine print." I stood in the hallway listening. I didn't cry. I just checked the time. The anticipation was electric. I felt like a predator, and for once, Mark was the prey. He thought he was the architect of my misery, but he was just the builder of his own cage. The dinner was in full swing. The table was set with white linen and silver. Mark's parents were there, looking smug. His biggest client, a billionaire named Mr. Sterling, was sitting at the head of the table. Mark was in his element. He stood up, clinking his glass. "I want to thank you all for coming," he beamed. "This is a big night. We're closing the chapter on this house and moving toward a future of growth. And I want to thank my wife, Clara, for, well, keeping the wine glasses full." The clients laughed. Mark's father gave him a wink. I walked out of the kitchen, but I wasn't carrying a tray of appetizers. I was carrying a stack of envelopes. "Actually, Mark," I said, my voice cutting through the laughter like a blade, "I have a special presentation for the victory dinner." Mark's smile faltered. "Clara, get back in the kitchen, now." "No," I said, standing at the foot of the table. I think Mr. Sterling would be very interested in the new direction you're taking, specifically your expertise in forging medical documents and real estate fraud. I walked around the table, placing an envelope in front of every guest. "Clara, stop this," Mark screamed, lunging for me. But I was faster. I stepped back, and Mr. Sterling had already opened his envelope. "What is this, Mark?" the client asked, his voice low and dangerous. "This looks like a DNA report and a police report for medical fraud." "It's a lie," Mark yelled, his face turning that familiar purple. "She's crazy. I told you all she was mentally unstable. She can't even have children. She's lost her mind." "I'm not crazy, Mark," I said, looking him dead in the eye, "and I'm not infertile. I have a clean bill of health from Dr. Eris, but you've been paying Toby's tuition out of the business escrow account. I think that's called embezzlement, isn't it, Mr. Sterling?" The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Mark looked at his parents. They were staring at the photos of him with Elena and Toby, the core family they weren't supposed to know about yet. The emotional explosion came from Mark's mother. She stood up and slapped him. "You lied to us? You told us you were the victim. You used that poor boy to hide your own failures?" Mark was trapped. His clients were walking out, his parents were ashamed, and his housewife was standing tall. The hidden advantage wasn't just the DNA, it was the escrow account. Mark had been so arrogant that he used his firm's business account to pay for Toby's secret life, thinking he could just replace the money when the house sold. "Mr. Sterling," I said as the billionaire stood to leave, "you might want to check the audit on the Riverside project. Mark didn't lose that money in the market. He lost it at the private school registrar." Mark collapsed into his chair. He looked small. For the first time in my life, he looked useless. "I did it for the name," he whimpered. "I just wanted to be a father." "You weren't a father, Mark," I said. "You were a parasite. You fed on my self-esteem for 12 years to cover up the fact that you were too proud to see a doctor. You stole my life." I pulled out the real divorce papers, the ones my lawyer had drafted. "I'm not signing your downsize papers, Mark. You're signing these. And since you've committed felony fraud, you're going to give me this house, the firm, and every cent you have left in that escrow account, or I'm handing the original files to the district attorney tonight." The logic was simple. He could go to prison for 10 years, or he could give me everything and walk away with nothing but his real family and his shame. "You can't do this," he whispered. "I can," I said, "because for 12 years you told me I was useless. I finally decided to prove you wrong. I'm actually quite good at business, Mark. I'm taking yours." He signed. He had to. He watched, broke. The hidden advantage wasn't just the DNA. It was the escrow account. Mark had been so arrogant that he used his firm's business account to pay for Toby's secret life, thinking he could just replace the money when the house sold. "Mr. Sterling," I said as the billionaire stood to leave, "you might want to check the audit on the Riverside project. Mark didn't lose that money in the market. He lost it at the private school registrar." Mark collapsed into his chair. He looked small. For the first time in my life, he looked useless. "I did it for the name," he whimpered. "I just wanted to be a father." "You weren't a father, Mark," I said. "You were a parasite. You fed on my self-esteem for 12 years to cover up the fact that you were too proud to see a doctor. You stole my life." I pulled out the real divorce papers, the ones my lawyer had drafted. "I'm not signing your downsize papers, Mark. You're signing these. And since you've committed felony fraud, you're going to give me this house, the firm, and every cent you have left in that escrow account, or I'm handing the original files to the district attorney tonight." The logic was simple. He could go to prison for 10 years, or he could give me everything and walk away with nothing but his real family and his shame. "You can't do this," he whispered. "I can," I said, "because for 12 years you told me I was useless. I finally decided to prove you wrong. I'm actually quite good at business, Mark. I'm taking yours." He signed. He had to. He watched, broken, as I took the keys to the office off the counter. The power shift was complete. I wasn't the help. I was the owner. The fallout was swift. Mark's firm collapsed within a month. No one wanted to do business with a man who embezzled from his own clients to fund a secret life. Mr. Sterling pulled all his contracts, and the rest followed like dominoes. Mark's real family didn't stay long. When Elena found out the truth that Mark wasn't a hero, but a fraud who had lied to her about his wealth and his wife, she took Toby and moved to her mother's in another state. She realized she was just another piece in his game of pretend. Mark's parents stopped talking to him. The shame of his public exposure was too much for their reputation. He ended up living in a tiny one-bedroom apartment, working as a low-level clerk for a firm that didn't know his history. He lost his cars, his suits, and his ego. As for me, I kept the house. I sold it, actually. I didn't want the ghosts. I took the money and opened my own boutique real estate firm, one based on transparency and ethics. I hired women who had been told they were useless and gave them careers. The legal consequences stayed over Mark's head for years. He had to pay back every cent of the embezzled money, which meant he'd be working for me indirectly for the rest of his life. Every paycheck he earned had a portion garnished to cover the debts he owed the estate. Emotionally, the justice was served cold. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to cry. I just needed to show the world who he really was. The man who called me useless was now the man who had nothing to show for his life but a trail of broken promises. I'm sitting on the balcony of my new apartment. It's small, but it's high up, and the view of the city is incredible. It smells like eucalyptus and expensive coffee. I feel calm. For 12 years, I defined myself by my ability to be a mother. I thought that without that, I was nothing. But sitting here now, I realize that I am so much more. I am a survivor. I am a business owner. I am a woman who knows her own worth. I did end up having a child, not through Mark, of course. 2 years after the divorce, I met a man who saw me, the real me. Not as a vessel, but as a partner. We have a daughter now. Her name is Grace. Every time I look at her, I'm reminded that the 1 in a million condition was just a lie told by a coward. I've grown. I don't apologize for existing anymore. I don't burn the toast because I'm too busy laughing. The ending isn't a dramatic explosion. It's a quiet morning with a baby's breath on my shoulder and a bank account that I earned. Mark is a distant memory, a cautionary tale I tell my daughter about the importance of knowing your truth. I am not useless. I am powerful. And for the first time in my life, I am finally complete. If you've ever been told that you're not enough or that your value is tied to what you can provide for someone else, please listen to me. They are lying. My story isn't just about a DNA test. It's about the moment I stopped believing the person who was supposed to love me most. It's about taking back your power and realizing that your uselessness is often just someone else's insecurity. Have you ever discovered a secret that changed your entire world? Have you ever had to fight for your own truth against someone you trusted? Tell me your story in the comments. I want us to build a community where no one is ever called useless again. If you found strength in Clara's journey, please give this video a like. It helps us reach more people who might be trapped in their own version of this story. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss another story of betrayal, justice, and the ultimate comeback. You are worth more than you know. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.